That is fantastic. Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being with us, and Michaela, Paulette, and I have a really great conversation planned for you. So we know that you're accustomed to listening to our CEO, Dr. David Rock, when we run these sessions, but once in a while, we have to give the guy a vacation, and so he gets to enjoy a holiday, and then we get to do the heavy lifting for him in his absence. So what we'll talk about, as Gabe was mentioning, is certainly this topic about us listening deeply. And you all might recall, because many of you, of course, are around our work of NLI, we published a Forbes article on how to be an ally. In this moment, listen deeply, unite widely, act boldly. And we published this article in June on the 3rd, 2020 of this year. And it was right on the heels of the George Floyd murder, which happened on May 25th. And so what we found is obviously that was kind of the last straw, proverbially speaking, that kind of broke the camel's back. There was already so much happening from an uncertainty standpoint and disruption standpoint with the pandemic, unemployment references, things like that, and then the George Floyd murder. And so we certainly felt very strongly that we needed to be really clear with the narrative in the market. So if you haven't read that article, please do so, because we talk from a science perspective, what leaders really need to do now. And because this is so, so important, and it requires such action right now, we actually will be doing this as a series. So in the coming weeks, today we'll talk about listen deeply, obviously, and then in the coming weeks, we'll tackle unite widely and act boldly, because these three actions are tied together strongly, very much interdependent. You can't do one without the other. And if you find that you might have to miss one of the upcoming sessions, definitely go to the website, grab the recording, because as you're doing this work, we want to help you get it right within your organizations because of this critical time that we're in and this important work that's incumbent upon us all. And so, Gabe, can I ask you to advance? I seem to not be getting a response. Thank you so much. So this is what I was just been speaking to everyone about, these three actions that's incumbent upon all leaders. And so definitely continue to be with us in the coming weeks. And Gabe, if you can go to the next slide, because again, I'm not advancing. So today, to give some context for this topic of listening deeply, what we want to do is really unpack this, because since publishing the article, so many organizations have come to us, and we've had this privilege of engaging with them, as well as just helping companies with this topic of how to really do this well. So we're going to unpack it from an organizational standpoint, really the different ways that organizations go about this. You'll then hear from Paulette kind of talk us through the various kind of different variations that are available and what organizations are doing. And if you haven't done this work, so we'll walk you through that. Then we'll get to hear from a science perspective from Michaela. So what's behind kind of what's needed foundationally to ensure, when we're talking about listening deeply, how to do that so that it goes well. We'll share with you some of the pitfalls that we've seen in our work in working with clients who are doing this, and then we'll close with a few other things. And obviously throughout the session, what we'll want to do is be engaging with you. Largely in the chat, we'll put questions to you and all of that, but don't wait for us. Definitely drop in insights and share with us what's coming up for you. We'll be monitoring it, taking as many questions as we possibly can, but we want this to be a really nice exchange. So that's what we have in store for you for this conversation. So Gabe, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So this is how we want to really frame the conversation that we're having together today. And here we talk about where are the different places that organizations can actually do the listening. So certainly in our talks with companies, they've said doing this one-to-one listening is pivotal, really needing their leaders to lean in more, recognizing that, and we'll get into this more, some of these conversations might be a bit awkward, a bit uncomfortable, but that needs to kind of take a backseat, because what they want to prioritize is for their employees to be heard. Another space, obviously, is just at the team level. So again, as we know, how when people come together from a social aspect, that brings even a richer kind of experience and even a wealth of more feedback for the organization. And then finally, we've seen various structures, and one we'll talk quite a lot about is in the space of a listening circle. And you'll hear us refer to it as both a listening circle and a listening session. And Paulette will really unpack kind of the differences between the various structures that can happen at this level. But it's just recognizing that, again, when we're talking about listening deeply, it's not just doing one thing, it's really recognizing that we've got, an organization has really got to hit it at these varying levels to ensure that they're really hearing from the workforce what's coming up for them, what it means from an insight perspective, and then what organizations do with that information. So with that, Paulette, I know you're prepared to really help us unpack this further, because, this really has been something, as you know, we've had so many organizations talking with us about, either engaging us to help them do this kind of work, or certainly getting our guidance and advice, because it's so important for them to actually get it right. So it might be good for you to kind of start us off and really take a deeper dive in these different areas.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barb. What a great point. There are several different modalities for listening to what employees have to say. And listening circles have probably been the least used in global corporate settings, frankly. So I think it behooves us to do a little bit of history and background. But in thinking about all of the different ways that we can listen to those around us, the objective of each of these modalities is kind of different, and the target audience is a little bit different. So what I mean by that is, in a listening circle, each participant has a chance, and depending on how it's designed, the obligation to speak, while the rest of the circle remains silent and listens deeply. So they're listening from the heart, they're listening with empathy. They are listening to truly hear what's being said, not to think about how it makes them feel or what they might want to say next. And the objective there is really, this is for the person speaking. The primary benefit is to that speaker, and so on and so forth as you go around the circle. Focus groups, alternatively, are more about gathering insights from a small group of participants, usually for the purposes of getting a pulse on employee experiences and perceptions and opinions. It could be used to create change, to get a sense of what the biggest challenges might be in the organization, or again, just to take a pulse and see where morale is at, where engagement is at. Town halls, and there have been a lot of these around race in the past few months. Town halls enable leadership to get up in front of the entire organization and share a message that's consistent, because everyone is hearing it at one time. Generally, technically, town halls are used to deliver information, but there is a component of taking questions. So because the room is so big, generally, and because there are a few speakers who have a lot of information to get through, the Q&A isn't the crux of the conversation, but there is an opportunity to tie that part in. And then finally, surveys are an anonymous way to get a pulse on what employees are thinking and feeling, again, usually around very specific issues like talent management or diversity and inclusion. So again, we want to focus on things like listening circles, listening sessions, a little bit on town halls. But the reason that Barb, we find this listening circle concept so compelling is because it's got deep roots in our history, in North American history with Native Americans, in Canada with First Nation peoples, in Australia, the Aboriginal population. These listening circles were developed from councils that met in these communities and literally took a stick, the listening stick, and said what they needed to say on a particular topic. They were either solving a problem or grappling with a challenge. They'd say their piece and then pass the stick to the next person in the circle. That person could speak, everyone remained quiet, so on and so forth, until the stick went all the way around the circle and everybody had their say. So that's its genesis. We do this a little bit differently in the corporate setting. Not everybody has to speak. We hope that they do. But we do want a few things to happen. So Gabe, if you could jump to the next slide, I can go through what those things look like. Again, the listening circle is a place to share and to be heard. It is primarily for the benefit of the speaker, but of course also has a lot of other benefits for those listening. For example, they could be getting insights, the speaker could be having insights as she's speaking. And leaders in the organization can really begin to learn how folks that report up to them are feeling. That said, it's not a place to air all of your grievances or share all of your feelings. There is an objective to a listening circle. It should be very specifically stated up front. And all of the sharing will revolve around that particular objective rather than being something like a therapy session where you kind of just blurt out whatever it is you want to talk about. It is a place to say, in that case, just enough, but not to go on and on and on. So there's usually something of a time limit, somewhere around 2 or 3 minutes each time a person speaks. Again, speaking about something that somehow relates to the workplace, but we know that the work and the personal are very integrated in a lot of ways. But what we're talking about in the listening circle has some impact on how we show up as an employee every day. And again, we talked about deep listening, listening from the heart, hearing without judgment, speaking from the heart, and not thinking of critiques or comments that you want to make to the speaker. That said, there's no saying that this hasn't gone wrong somewhere, and we know there are some good examples where things have gone a little bit astray. Being able to speak your feelings doesn't, again, mean saying anything you want to say, and it certainly doesn't mean saying something incredibly hurtful to someone else. So beyond those guidelines, you're free to share in your 2 or 3 minute period. And we have found that folks have walked away from this gaining tremendous insight into even their own feelings about a particular topic that they didn't realize they had.
Paulette, thank you so much for just really helping us understand, right, the different ways that organizations can go about listening. And I'm especially intrigued by, because you, of course, have spent more time here talking about the listening circle, giving us a sense of the genesis of this. When you look at the current climate, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here a bit, what would we say to those who are listening who, this hasn't been done in their organizations and they're thinking about how to do this? I see such parallel between the town hall and the listening circle. What would we recommend if organizations are figuring out how to tackle this and how to proceed?
Great question, Barb. I think it really depends on what you want to come away with. If a leadership primarily wants to share information about their approach or policy changes or some new cultural initiative that's coming up around some of these issues, for example, the town hall would really be the best method. Folks can ask questions, but they're really learning new information from leadership. The listening circle, alternatively, is a place where everybody has the opportunity to surface what they're thinking and feeling around a particular issue. It can be a place to ask questions, but it's really geared toward sharing what is on your mind in the moment or something that you've been thinking about for a matter of years. Completely different objectives.
So helpful. Thanks for that, Paulette. And I would love to hear from you all who've joined us today. Now that we've started to unpack this topic, please share with us what's been happening inside of your organization. So which form has your company or organization, what have they used? And what seems to have had the biggest impact? So go ahead and share that with us as well, because we would love to know. Oh, so I see comments pouring in, Paulette, about a lot of town halls, it looks like. Um,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
town halls in this moment are really important for leaders who are taking a very clear position or want to share their thinking about what's going on today. There's a lot of importance for doing that, sometimes as a precursor to the listening circle.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure we've all been flooded with the emails from organizations with whom we order online or things like that, that tell us the position they're taking on the George Floyd murder, for example, Black Lives
Yeah.
Matter. The town
Mm-hmm.
hall is something like that, an opportunity for leadership to set a tone from the top. So those are important. And then once it's time to go more deeply and hear from the employees themselves, listening circles are an incredibly powerful way to do that.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And I just want to make sure those of you who've joined us, you've got that distinction, because I wonder too, Paulette, like how much within organizations, like town halls, we're all familiar with, right? And so, like you just mentioned, with, as we saw these really increase after the death of George Floyd, we started getting the requests, we started hearing more and more about these taking place, and it seems to be the familiar frame.
Mhm.
Right. And I just wonder how much organizations have even known or made this distinction with the listening circle. And so I really appreciate how you've talked us through that to help, our attendees really look at the difference and when one is more appropriate than another.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Barb, as well. We're hearing increasing questions at NLI, or receiving increasing questions around what is a listening circle? How do we conduct a listening circle? We've achieved this moment, this tipping point where folks really want to understand what that's about. The town
Mm-hmm.
hall is great, but the listening circle really is about understanding who you've got working for you in your organization. And it represents a real progressive step for leadership and a lot of trust and respect to open up those doors and say, we want to hear from you rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and that sends such a powerful message. And thanks all. I see some questions that you all are raising, which we are absolutely going to get to. So hold us accountable to that. So I want to pivot a bit now that we've been talking about just, level setting for all of us, like the different ways that organizations can go about listening and the different spaces that it can happen within. I think it'll be helpful now, Michaela, to turn to you to understand from a science perspective, like what's really underneath them. So Paulette talked about like the importance of being heard, and she mentioned things like that. So how do we ensure that as organizations, it sounds like so many folks have been a part of this already, how do we ensure that they understand the science behind these and design in such a way that they get them right?
Great question. So yes, if we can advance to the next slide. I'd like to talk about three main points for organizations when they're thinking about creating and implementing um, these circles. And one factor that's extremely important is psychological safety. And I'll go into these in a minute, each one individually. But creating psychological safety, facilitating insight, and setting the stage to encourage action on the part of everybody. So if we could move to the next slide, I'd like to tell you more about psychological safety. Some of you have probably heard this, what this is, or know what it is. It's a climate in which people feel safe expressing ideas, concerns, and mentioning mistakes without fear of embarrassment or retribution. So let's just take a moment and step back and take that in. What that means is like you're in an environment where it's okay to express your ideas, your concerns, and talk about fears, mistakes, without retribution. That could be anything from, in the workplace when it has to do with what's happening with decision making, to these settings such as these circles, these listening circles, where Yvette has spoken about, we want to create empathy and people speaking from the heart. So that means there's vulnerability that's being expressed. In order for that to happen, it has to be a safe environment. If people don't feel safe, then they are not going to share, and they're not going to be able to speak from the heart. And so moving on, like, okay, you could be saying, oh, Michaela, what does that mean? So I want to take it a step further. If we can move to the next slide. And I'd like to talk about, some of you who are familiar with NLI, we talk about threat and reward. So again, when we think about not feeling safe, that gives us a sense of threat where it is not safe for us. And we feel that in our bodies. And it's, there's something really distinctive happening in the brain when we don't feel safe, just as there's something very distinctive in our brains that happens when we feel safe and when we're getting a reward. So we talk about human beings that we're highly motivated by our social relationships, as we're motivated by social rejection, which can come across as threatening, and by social acceptance, which is very rewarding to us. And when we feel rejection or threat, it can affect how we perceive the world around us. So when we feel under threat, literally our field of vision can narrow. It's not even just, we're walking, in the forest and a leopard, comes out and scares us. We don't have those settings anymore, but we are in these social environments. But our bodies and our brains can perceive a threat in the same way, so that we feel under threat, our vision is going to narrow. We're not able to retain information as well. We become less creative. We're less able to generate new ideas, and we're less willing and able to collaborate. So again, think about that in a listening circle. If people are feeling under threat, this sharing from the heart, this empathy is not going to happen. And because we have this drive to move away from threat and towards reward, I want to talk about more of like, how can we foster reward? When we are in this reward or approach state, we're more willing to do difficult things. We're more willing to take risks. We're more willing to think deeply about issues, all of which are very positive. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you to the SCARF model, which is one of NLI's foundational models. And it describes these 5 primary domains that are triggers of threat and reward. And so I'm going to walk you through each one briefly. So the S in SCARF stands for status. So that's about caring, about respect, and feeling valued. And we're always intuitively aware of kind of where we fit into some kind of hierarchy or how we belong in a social circle. So again, when you think about a listening circle, it's really important for people to feel like they belong and that they're valued. And one of the things for organizations to be explicit about is it's okay to be clumsy. Like we're all here to share together. We have a common goal, a common objective, which hopefully has been established. And you know what? It's okay to say something clumsy. It's safe here. So that's one way to to put people what we call in a toward state rather than a threat state. The next domain in the SCARF model is certainty. And we talk about that as like feeling that you're in the loop. You know what's going on, that you have the information that other people have. And one of the ways where you can create a toward state when it comes to listening circles is that people understand that nothing is going to be reported back. Like there's a bubble or a container of confidentiality, and people are going to share honestly and authentically in this circle, but it's not like somebody's going to take that and then, pass that on to other people. So there's that sense of like, okay, I feel secure knowing that what I say will be held and received and kept confidential in this space. So another way to create a toward state, according to the SCARF model, I'm going to go to the A, which stands for autonomy. That's that sense of, am I given choices? Do I have a sense of control? So one of the ways we can create threat with autonomy is micromanaging people. When people feel micromanaged, that sends a threat signal, and there's a lack of trust. And so to create a sense of certainty where people feel respected and valued and trusted is, you know what, you get to choose what you share. We're not going to say you have to go in there and bare your heart and soul. Even if you feel safe, there's still containers and boundaries to be had. So you get to choose what you share. So that is another way to create a toward state and to create deep psychological safety for people in these listening circles. Now I'd like to move to R, which is relatedness. It's like, am I part of the group? Do I feel like I belong? You know, this is where we really, and this is all getting at inclusion. This is when we're really talking about inclusion. Do I feel part of the group? Do I feel accepted? Do I get the cues that there's warmth and curiosity and openness to my perspective of what I have to say? And so again, organizations, you want to create this sense of psychological safety in a toward state when it comes to relatedness, that where we can feel that we can connect to one another's experiences, where we might not agree or we might not understand, but we are open to other perspectives and being aware that we have our subjective experience in the world. And we are here to learn and to listen and to come together. And F, I'm going to take us to F, which stands for fairness. You know, are we being treated equitably? And one of the ways to create toward state is, you know, kind of going back to autonomy. You choose what you get to share, but it's true for everybody. It's not like, oh, no, you have to share more than other people because you fit XYZ profile. No, people can share to what extent they want, and it's fair in that, in terms of the expectations, if you will. So now I would like to shift from psychological safety to facilitating insight. So one of the things that's really important for organizations is to create a container in which insights can be generated. And I just like to, I know you can read this, but I'm going to read it out loud for you. So talking about insight. So, and this comes from one of our articles in the Neuroleadership Journal. On a neural level, having an insight can help us make associations that ultimately deepen our understanding. Insight is a powerful tool that can lead employees to be more intrinsically motivated in their own growth and personal investment, leading to long-lasting positive changes in performance and adaptability to change. So when we think about this, reflect back on what I was saying about psychological safety and creating toward states for people. And then we're thinking, okay, we're in this safe space where we don't feel threatened and people are sharing their perspectives. We're listening, we're learning. And often when we hear new things, we might make connections in ways that we didn't before. We're like, oh, I didn't realize that, you know, X influenced Y. And those create places for deep insight to occur. And that helps us deepen our understanding and our learning. And I would like us to move to the next slide because I would thank you. I'd like to talk more about where insights come from. So again, that third one down there, it says perspective taking. There's that aspect where I said of people sharing perspectives that maybe you hadn't seen before, you hadn't made connections before. And again, in terms of organizations, in terms of creating these listening circles, creating these toward states where people feel safe, we normalize these behaviors, right? It's okay to be clumsy. It's okay to share what you feel comfortable sharing. So just when we create this container, it will lead to deeper insights and the introduction of the Eureka Scale. And actually, I'd love to turn it over to Barbara as she walks us through the Eureka Scale, if you don't mind. This is like in line to insights. I saw somebody go to that slide, so.
Yeah,
You can go ahead and
exactly.
move
Let's see
back
if
to
I
that.
can. Yeah, thanks, Michaela. So helpful to hear just the criticality of the science behind all of this. And for you, Michaela, and for you, Paulette, we have some great questions coming up in the chat. So I want us, Michaela, to get through these next two slides quickly so we can try to take a couple of questions. Gabe, can you help me out? I'm sorry. I'm trying
No
to click
worries.
the arrow. It is not
Little
advancing.
technical issue over here, so I'll help him out.
Gotcha. As Gabe is working through the technical glitch, so the Eureka Scale, we have done research on this, roughly about 400 people, and the net is we were able to find that there was a definite correlation between the strength of an insight that one had and a behavior change. So the motivation that someone had to actually take action. So obviously the strength, if it's 0, there's nothing there. And Gabe, you can really build this out to level 3. And so essentially that level 1 is, it's like a feeling. Level 2 is, we recognize kind of that, we have an aha, but that aha, it's like fleeting, right? It just as quickly as it comes, it leaves us. And 3, it might stay a little bit longer for a few days, but the motivation isn't as strong. Gabe, let's build out 4 and 5. This is where we really want to be, and what we want to help to, cultivate in others as well as experience for ourselves. Where the real change happens is at a level 4 insight, because here it's so strong for people that it stays with them actually for days and days and days, which is, exciting. And so that's why that motivation is stronger for them to do something. But 5 is obviously the ultimate, right? 5 is like life-changing, as in complete rewiring. We can't see things the way we did previously. We see things in a totally different way, which is why it's so powerful, and why, the intensity of the insight matters. And so I think, Michaela, you're going to talk to us quickly about just how to design to actually, enable this in others.
Right. So just, in the spirit of time, I would just like to close by saying that when we create deep psychological safety, create a container for people to develop insights, and we model that behavior as leaders in organizations, where we normalize this behavior, where we establish our shared values and goals, that will help encourage action on the part of those in the learning circle as well as the organization. Again, with the organization setting the tone, serving as role models, creating a cultural norm by which it's encouraged to behave in ways that align with the shared vision, the shared goals, and the shared values.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for that, Michaela. And I want to thank you all, turn to you, our attendees. Really love the conversation in the chat. So I've got to be careful. I'm supposed to be facilitating, but I'm really reading the rich dialogue that you all are having. So I want to pick 1 or 2 questions that have come up. And Paulette, the first one I'm going to direct to you, because I've seen it in the chat a few times, where people are saying, so they're picking up on, the value of holding listening circles. But the question is, how do you balance kind of the value of holding a listening circle with kind of the respecting confidentiality, right? Seems like, how do you get at that, or how do you solve for that? And,
Yeah.
and people are anchoring that. Do we need to be overly concerned about that?
I think if you set the right guidelines and really stay true to them, you needn't be too concerned about that. And we've been getting this question a lot. So yes, there is a confidentiality we need to talk about at the beginning of every listening circle, and to take that very seriously. But like we do in our research, Barb, you can take themes. We take themes from focus groups. We take themes from interviews. Similarly, with listening circles, we can look at what's being discussed at an aggregate level. Even if we should use a quote, a phrase here or there, we'd want to be very careful that it couldn't possibly identify anyone. But as long as we're bringing everything up to a high level and looking at big picture themes, we can be less concerned about confidentiality, because we would never say anything first as a theme that wasn't said by a number of people. That's a theme. And as long as we're not attaching names or saying what group, what listening session a theme or a comment came from, we're still maintaining confidentiality.
So helpful, Paulette. And one more I want to throw at you, Paulette, because it pertains to you. Sorry, Michaela. Listen, attendees, throw some questions at Michaela too. But there's another question that came up around, in these listening circles, should we be having facilitators or leaders even take part in them? So how do we feel about that?
Yeah, I think having a facilitator who sets up the ground rules, for example, is a wonderful idea. And they keep the conversation going. They make sure, we're playing within the boundaries that we've set. They can steer the conversation if something really outrageous comes up, because again, we know we want to talk about our feelings and share deeply, but we don't want to be hurtful or nasty or say violent things. The facilitator will be there to reframe the conversation or to guide away from comments like that. And the facilitator will also just set up what the discussion is about beyond the technical objectives or the technical boundaries. The facilitator will say something like, we're going to focus on this issue. We're going to start with this particular question. Let's go around the circle and share your answer to that question. I think a facilitator in a corporate setting especially is a great idea.
Great.
If I could just address the kind of status or hierarchy issue of like
Thank
whether
you. That was going to be my follow-up. Take it away. Yeah.
So I think it's, again, really important for the organization to look at how much safety. We talk about psychological safety. People might want to think it's there, but there could be people who still don't feel safe. So you need to take that with a grain of salt and really to assess that and maybe ask your people. So maybe it might be important where it's the employees, if you will, without the management, without the leaders in this space, to generate or create a sense of safety that maybe can be built up. And as people feel safe and get acknowledgement and cues from leadership, that it will be acknowledged, their statements, and there will not be any retribution, because they have to see that. Until that's in place, then maybe you want to consider, if it's not already there, then you move where there's a leader involved. But we have to be really sure that people feel safe. Otherwise, they're not really going to be sharing. They might be listening and sharing what is quote unquote safe, but we might not get to those deep points.
What a great caveat. What a great explanation, Michaela. I want to be clear. When I say a facilitator can be helpful, never someone to whom the folks in the circle report, never. I would say if you want to have listening sessions for HR, they'd be for HR specifically, not sprinkled into the rest of the groups, because that's another area, to Michaela's point, where there may be a feeling of limited safety. So this is really sort of by the people, for the people. I think you form the circle, and someone who wants to facilitate among the employee group would be best to do that. Or if you really want to be careful and make folks feel safe, you bring in someone external.
Yeah, beautiful. And we're getting a comment. Thanks, Cecilia. Was just echoing how she's even seen it, where when you have leaders in the room, then people don't feel as safe, and so the conversation isn't as rich, basically. She said it more eloquently than I just did, but really important point. All right. Well, I better move us along. There's so much to unpack here, and we definitely want to talk with you even more so about, what can go wrong in doing these, as well as, make sure that we get it right. And so that takes us to the next, and you can advance us, Gabe. Thank you so much. So here is what great looks like. And, it's much of what both Paulette and what Michaela has been talking a lot about. Really the space where people are safely sharing, people leave the session where they definitely feel heard and understood. It's not that everybody has to be in agreement. People just need to be able to speak and feel like they've been heard. That's really one of the main objectives. And also from a leadership perspective, when the information is coming to them, a lot of organizational leaders will be hearing what they don't want to hear. And so they've got to have a growth mindset about, recognizing, hey, if this is where the places where people are, we need to understand that and make sure we're clear with respect to where people are coming from, as opposed to getting defensive. Whereas what can go wrong with these? Gabe, we have that on the next slide. Some of you who've joined us may have even heard about some of these instances when this has happened. So from how leaders, I remember reading it within one organization where some of the leaders who had taken part in the session were laughing. I don't think they were laughing at the issues. As many of you know, sometimes it's just nervousness, or when we don't know how to respond to something, it's a way to kind of release some of that anxiety we're experiencing in the moment. But unfortunately, it sends the wrong message, right, to the attendees. Also, I've seen in some settings where, you know, when we don't get the balance right, it's one thing to make sure that people feel like they have a space, like we've been, especially Paulette and Michaela have just said, feel psychologically safe or they can share. But that doesn't mean that it's okay for people to be able to be disrespectful or show intolerant views. And we've seen some of that kind of play out when organizations have done these. Or even, you know, organizations minimizing, right, just how sensitive these topics are. And so those are the things to just really recognize. And certainly for us, when we have the privilege, when our clients ask us to lead these types of circles on their behalf, for our facilitators who are very well trained, brain-based training, these are individuals who have years of experience of facilitating coursework. They're most or all of them are certified coaches, and still before they go into leading listening circles, we really give them strong instruction, and we're very prescriptive about the headspace they need to be in, and also how they just can't treat this like it's any other meeting or any other training course. So just want to, you know, leave that with all of you inside of your organizations as you're working with alongside your leaders who do this work. The opportunity to do them is amazing. But we can't underestimate the things that can go wrong, that can undo the goodness that the organization is looking to accomplish. So with that, Paulette, I want to come back to you because just as we've, you know, quickly shared kind of like tips and things to kind of avoid, what should organizations also keep in mind as they're leading these on behalf of their employees?
I think there are a few things that you want to be careful to think about, and one of them goes right back to the conversation we were having about 5 minutes ago. That is who you're choosing to run these sessions. Similarly to focus groups, do you use somebody from inside of the organization, or do you bring in an external trained facilitator? You may very well get a different response from the group if you use someone outside versus inside. That depends on what your objective for the group is. Do you want people managers to lead and create a leader-led, or sort of do a train the trainer so leaders can lead listening sessions? The objective for that might be a little bit different. It's not just for the benefit of those who are sharing, but in cases like that, leaders are really learning what's going on in the organization.
Sure. And Paulette, can you pause for a second? Gabe, can you advance the slides? I think we are ahead of you a little bit. One more.
Just a bit, yeah. One more.
I'm always behind.
Thank you, Gabe.
Okay. Yeah, and when scaling, you think the question is here, not just how do I take this to other parts of the organization, but how do I retain the quality of the experience that you had when you were doing the pilot session, for example. So again, that's where who you choose to do the facilitation comes in, how structured you want the conversation to be, how broad the topic is that you'll be discussing. For example, do I discuss the same 1, 2, 3 questions across the entire organization in every group? How do you get people to participate? Is it a voluntary activity, or do you do random selection? You want to think about how you design the group. So do you bring together a group of 6 or 7 individuals who are diverse by gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, nationality, things like that? Or do you want to do some homogeneous groups with the idea that some different things could come up if you have a group of, all gay men or all Black women? That might be a very different conversation than what would happen in a more diverse group. And above and beyond everything, want to think very carefully about the kinds of questions that you ask, and maintaining that quality of guidance from the facilitator or whomever is kicking off the group in terms of creating psychological safety and making sure that folks speak their turn but not go over, that nothing overly critical or upsetting or hostile comes up, and making sure that quality is maintained across every group.
Beautiful, Paulette. Thank you so much for providing that to all of us. And so a couple of things I want to do quickly. Gabe, if we can go to the next slide. So attendees, we're coming to you. I see some of your questions, and I think we'll be able to get a couple of them in. If you can put in the chat for us, you know, for the listening sessions held inside of your organizations, what was the focus? You heard Paulette talk about, you know, in some instances, it was focused on race relations because of what's happening from a race relation and social justice perspective here in the United States, as an example. Or was it more just broader issues that really fall into just the inclusion space? So we'd love to hear from you on that. And then also I saw in the chat earlier on, it was Paulette, Michaela, there was a reference to like questions, you know, what are some of the questions? So those of you who've joined us, if you can drop in the chat from just what's happened inside of your organizations, what were some of the best questions that were used that really encouraged dialogue and seem to have had like a tremendous impact? So if you can drop that in, and you are so welcome, Adam, that we're asking everybody to share. So awesome. So while they're sharing, I want to come to a couple of other questions. Gabe, I'm coming, stay with me. So I think I saw a question around, yeah, so Paula, I figured this question was going to come up, you know, what are the methods for trying to determine if we're talking diverse versus homogeneous, right? Like, is there criteria or something that we can help people use to really make that determination?
Yeah, I think again, it depends on your objective and what kind of conversations you want to have. Now, with a recent client who is doing a large number of listening circles, we're actually recommending that most of them, but not all of them, be diverse. So we can see if there really is a difference in the conversations. When we do focus groups, we generally recommend homogeneous groups around a particular demographic characteristic, because research has shown that the participants will feel safer, they'll be more willing to share, and more willing to share really deep information and make themselves more vulnerable in a conversation like that. That said, there's a lot of benefit to having a diverse group as well, because there's learning happening in these circles, and ultimately that's what we want when it comes to issues like this. So again, it really depends on the objective of your listening circle program. You could split it half and half and see which one is working better for your purposes. If it is truly just for employees to have a safe space, let's try homogeneous groups. But if it's to learn as well as share, let's try some diverse groups.
Really helpful. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to take another question or two, but Gabe, I think there's some information that you want to share with folks. So we'll hand off to you for the moment.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, we do like to, before we continue on, just get a sense of what might be useful for you. So we try to keep this poll just kind of running in the background for the remainder of the webinar. I'm going to take you through just a couple quick things and then hand it back over to Barbara. So I just wanted to mention the summit. We do this annually. We're leaning in even deeper to many of the topics we've covered in the past few months in this space, but this time it will be for 72 straight hours, if you can believe that. It's a full-on hackathon. We'll have a number of brilliant speakers and content that will appeal to a global audience and time zones, totally virtual and about an eighth of the price it normally is, less than $500 this year. So save that date and stay tuned for more information. A couple other opportunities. I know these are sort of split around these slides. Speaking of listening circles that Barbara, Paulette, and Michaela are talking about, We do these insider exchanges every week with different hosts. You may recognize Barbara there. She hosts them, as well as our CEO, David Rock, and Khalil Smith talks culture and leadership. Esther Naznanova conducts conversations on diversity and inclusion. These are very intimate experiences where people are on video, they speak up and share their experiences. So if you're interested in that, please.
Gabe, you're breaking up a little bit.
In terms of questions on the poll, you know what, I'm going to go off video if that's the case.
Yeah.
Hopefully this makes it a little better, but now you don't get to see my face. The learning strategy audits, these are for organizations contending with coming back to the office or staying remote, or some with a kind of a hybrid form of those two realities. If you're struggling with virtual learning, you can reach out to us. This is how you can do so. You can choose that as an option on the poll. We take you through the science in transitioning to a virtual learning environment. Based on our research, we found virtual learning was already far more effective than in-person workshops for sustained learning and habit formation. So you can express your interest there. The NLI challenge quickly, we can help you reduce your learning budget by 25%. That's another thing. If you select it, we can have one of our client advisors reach out to you and discuss how you can do that, and we'll schedule a session. So I'm going to leave that poll running in case anything else comes to mind, and we'll be sure to make sure we serve you in that. And then I think I'm just going to hand back to you, Barbara. Thanks for letting me get all that out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gabe, for sharing with us. And so I was just going through the chat to see what else was coming up for folks that we haven't yet answered. But Michaela, we haven't heard from you in a while, so I think I'm going to bounce to you. You know, I'm curious, Michaela, like I'm not seeing a specific question pertaining to the science, but certainly when you look at all that we've been talking about in this conversation, so the different ways organizations can lean in to do this kind of work, a lot of activity from our attendees talking about, you know, what they've seen and how they're grappling with some of these questions. I want to ask you one of my favorite questions, as you know, is, you know, what would be your leave behind for folks? Like what would you want to ensure that they take away from a science perspective that's really going to help them within their organizations to lead these kinds of conversations very well?
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I think if anything is to understand that we all have our unique experiences, which might be common among a group of people, but the way that we approach the world and our social situations, especially at work, are really dependent on, again, I'm going to just anchor in on this safety of how safe do people feel. And that might mean that there are different configurations at work that people feel safe, but just to be aware of that varied experience. And also awareness that all of us, we again see the world through our subjective lens, and I'm sure most of us realize there are other perspectives out there, but really to be able to take the perspective of others and understand that others have different experiences. And when we're creating this container for listening circles, to be very mindful. Yes, it might be great that your company is, you know, creating listening circles, but again, is it a place where people feel safe? So really look deeply into your organization. I would say to do that, and not with you know, shame or, you know, or anything like that, but in terms of taking a growth mindset. How can we develop and grow as an organization so that those in our organization can also flourish and develop and grow? So, you know, just give a good look at your organization and look more into psychological safety of creating that environment from small groups to larger groups. And, you know, I think it's a good place to start.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Michaela. So Gabe, we'll wrap and turn it over to you.